I'm Cliff Ribner, and I'm going to talk to you today about some specific texts of the founders, specific writings that they made about the guarantee clause and the stuff that's in it that relates to everything. The guarantee clause, and by the way, whenever you see the text on the screen, if it goes by too fast, you can pause your video so you can read it, because I don't want the fact that I'm talking at the same time that it's there to interfere with your being able to read the text. The text is very important. It's not just words on paper. The founders made sure that everything had to be set in writing. And that's the whole purpose of the Constitution, to have a written contract between all the parties to the government. And in the case of the Constitution, the parties are us, the people and the states. That's who signed it. And in it, they created the federal government. The federal government is subservient to the Constitution. It's unlike anything that any other government has ever had in history in any other country. That's the whole point of the Constitution, to have a government that's created in the document with its powers specifically described in it. And the powers of the federal government are enumerated in Article 1, Section 8, where it says what areas the Congress is allowed to legislate about. The legislative powers are the powers of the federal government. It doesn't have any powers to do anything other than what's stated in the Constitution, and the laws of the country are created by the Congress. And Article 1, Section 8, which I will show you in this, it begins with the General Welfare Clause. And one of the things that leftists have claimed gives the federal government the power to do anything, as long as Congress and the president claim it's for the general welfare. Basically, this wipes out all this description of the enumerated powers that follow immediately that clause, because in Article 1, Section 8, it spells out what the powers are. And in the Federalist 41, which I will show you right here, James Madison described exactly what that general welfare clause means. It doesn't give the federal government the power to pass and to spend money and tax money and do anything it wants, and because it claims it's for the general welfare. What it does is it limits the powers that are enumerated which follow it. None of those powers can be exercised except to the extent that they are for the general welfare of the people. It's a limiting clause on those powers. And James Madison makes fun of the whole thing. He says, how can a semicolon misread give the federal government all that power? Why did they bother enumerating all the powers if they could just do anything they wanted? The whole point of the clause, this goes for spending and taxing, as well as each of those powers. It's not allowed to spend money except to the extent that every dollar goes for the general welfare. It's not allowed to do pork. All the stuff that the senators do, the senators and the Congress, building things just for the sake of their own districts, that's completely unconstitutional. It violates the general welfare clause because it's not for the general welfare. It's for a very specific thing. And if any dollar gets spent just benefiting a particular person, like welfare, for example, or Medicare, that's unconstitutional also. Article 5 of the Constitution gives procedures which, if followed, permit the Constitution to be amended. And if they want to amend it, to change it, to do that stuff, they can go ahead and use those procedures. And by the way, there's basically three things that the left, and yes, it's the left, it's Marxists, who have created all of the violations of the Constitution, principally beginning since Theodore Roosevelt started doing it in 1906. But it actually began in 1887 with the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission. All of those federal agencies, each and every one of them, that claims it has the power to run a particular market. The Interstate Commerce Commission was created so that the federal government could dictate how the railroad industry was going to be run. And it takes all the power away from the individual companies, because nothing is more important. There's two things that you have when you own stock in a company. You have the right to control it to the extent of your stock ownership, and you have the right to dividends and other earnings and profits of the company to the extent of your stock ownership. Those are the two things. And what those agencies do is they take away one of those powers. They take away the power to run the company. because everyone in the company has to answer to multiple, as it turns out now, multiple federal agencies in order to run the company. They have to get their approval. It's a situation where they can't just go ahead and do it. They have to beg permission. And in many cases, they're just not allowed to do it. They set up these rules. They're not even, and what each of those agencies have is all three powers of government: legislative, executive, and judicial, because they get to impose punishments also. In our society, in America, following the British rule, beginning with Magna Carta, punishment is not allowed to be extracted from anyone except pursuant to court proceedings which constitute due process. There has to be guilt proven before money can be extracted for someone to pay or for someone to be forced to do something. And those agencies just set up automatic prohibitions. They are the equivalent of injunctions, which normally you can only go to a court to get. When they write their rules, they're setting up the equivalent of prior restraints on what a business can do. Anyway, there's several bases on which the left has been justifying setting up all of these unconstitutional agencies. One of them is the General Welfare Clause. They claim that gives the federal government the power to do anything based on their claims that it's good for the general welfare. And the Federalist 41 shows that that's nonsense. And the other two are, they claim that the Interstate Commerce Clause, which I'm also going to show you, provides them the power to dictate over all business just because commerce is involved. And in fact, in the Federalist 46, James Madison wrote, no, that's not the case at all. It's a very limited power. And he was very specific about what the purpose of it was. It gives the federal government the power to police the states. It doesn't give the federal government the power to police individuals. And what it does is it gives the federal government the power to police the states, to prevent them from harming out-of-state businesses. That's the whole purpose of that clause in the Constitution. And you can tell by its context. If it actually permitted the federal government to police individuals, then the federal government would also be allowed to police foreign citizens, because of the way the clause is written. And you can see it. I'm showing it to you right now. And you can pause your computer as you're watching this, or phone, so you can see exactly what it says. It doesn't say anything about permitting the policing of American individuals or particularly American businesses. And that's two bases. The other thing is they claim that the Constitution is a living, breathing document. Doesn't that sound nice? And what they mean by that is it can be changed by a judge sitting on the bench just because he thinks, oh, well, things have changed. People's views about a particular topic have changed. So we can rewrite the Constitution without rewriting it. And the fact that the Constitution has Article 5 in it providing for its revision, if the people want it, then if they don't follow those procedures, they're not allowed to change it. We don't want a living Constitution. We want a dead Constitution. And they say it that way because they make it sound so nice and sweet. But those are the three things that they've claimed give them the power to do anything they want. And the General Welfare Clause, which simply permits them to raise taxes and to spend money, and for the general welfare, only for the general welfare. That's the only basis on which they're allowed to do it. And it also limits all of the enumerated powers which follow it. And I hope you pause your computer long enough to read those enumerated powers. They're very interesting. They're very limited. But they're very specific things they wanted the federal government to be able to do. So it's the General Welfare Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause, and this notion that the Constitution is a living, breathing document. And all they mean by that is it's a nothing. It's a worthless piece of paper. Judges could change it. And yet Article 6 of the Constitution is very specific that it's the supreme law of the land. You think if you have a contract with someone and that person wants to enforce it, they can, and they break it, you have to go to court, and the judge can say, oh, well, this contract's a living, breathing contract, then he chose to change it, so the hell with you. You think that's the way it would turn out? I can guarantee you that's not. And the Constitution is subject to the same laws of contract which existed prior to its existence. Anyway, the founders also had a very specific meaning in the guarantee clause when they guarantee a Republican form of government. As Hamilton said, and this is a quote, I'm going to show you the text from the Federalist 22. The fundamental maxim of Republican government requires that the sense of the majority should prevail. And that's the whole point of the Constitution, to always have, to be able to achieve majority rule and to be able to defeat minorities that are trying to control everyone else, oligarchies. And also, what that clause does is it guarantees that none of the states will become a monarchy or something other than a republic. And it concedes that if they stay the way they are, or if they remain like the other states, that will be sufficient to be a Republican form of government, so they won't be violating that clause. But Madison particularly wanted that clause because he was very concerned that individual politicians would try to use the power of the state to achieve power over their fellow citizens. And that's why he particularly wanted that clause in the Constitution. He was the principal author. And he and Hamilton and John Jay were the authors of the essays which are in the Federalist. The Federalist is the most authoritative analysis of the Constitution. It was written by the three of them, primarily Hamilton and Madison, while the Constitution was being considered for ratification after it was written in the Congress or in the Constitutional Convention. And I'm going to show you some other provisions in the Federalist which show very clearly that the founders knew exactly what a Republican form of government is, and that's what's guaranteed in the guarantee clause, and that it required any time that there be a vote, that the vote always be by a majority. And they set up things where there were different situations where voting was required. For example, voting is required for senators. It happens that now we do it directly, but it's always a majority of the citizens of the state who elect their senator. And within the Senate, within the government, it's the majority that has to vote. It can't be it can't require a supermajority. And that's why the filibuster rule violates the guarantee clause and the Constitution so blatantly, because it requires a supermajority as the general rule. And there were several situations in the Constitution which require more than a majority, and the founders went to great lengths to justify each of those particular instances. For example, in the Federalist 62, they went to great lengths to justify the requirement for a supermajority vote of the Senate, both for passing treaties and convicting the president in an impeachment. And in 73, Federalist 73, he went to similar lengths to justify the particular requirement for a supermajority vote of the Senate and House to override presidential vetoes. Because in that last instance, they were, of course, overruling the president who had been elected by the people. But he wasn't a dictator. They never wanted him to be a dictator. He had to be subject to veto, and that's why that power is in there. It's an exception. The supermajority vote for each of those three things is an exception to the general rule that the majority must rule. And the Senate is violating that, and they do it, and they achieve terribly corrupt outcomes. And these are exactly the corrupt outcomes that were predicted by Hamilton, where he, in that same Federalist 22, where he described the corruption involved, where a supermajority is required, because you can't pass anything without buying off the minority. You have to get the votes of the minority when you have a supermajority vote, and you can't do it without buying them off. I'm Cliff Ribner, and if you like what I have to say, please like this and send it to other people you know, and watch my other videos.